from the back of the room, Commander Chris Hadfield. Thank you, everyone. Chris, welcome to Ireland and welcome to Newstalk. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It is a delight to be here and to be welcomed so warmly. Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
I was explaining to Chris just a few minutes ago of the effort that people have gone to and the following that he has here, and he's well aware of it. So I know he's appreciative of the fact that you're all here on Saturday as well. So thank you very much for that. All right, look, let's get into it and let's start talking. And I'm going to use the book very much so as a guide, because Chris's book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life, is out now. And if I'm a journalist, and if I was writing the script, I would have my 9-year-old main player in the script watch the moon landing in his neighbour's cottage and decide at that moment I'm going to be an astronaut. But that is what happened.
That's exactly what happened. As improbable as that was, that my parents, we didn't have a television at the time. My parents took us over to the neighbors, and I sat myself on a sofa, sort of like up on the back with my brother, like this against the wall, because the sofa was full of people, and watched this little tiny television with the rabbit ears on top, watching the first 2 human beings step foot onto the moon, and it was fascinating to watch. It was science fiction turned into science fact, but at the same time, it was immensely, not just inspiring, but enabling to watch something that was impossible become possible. And as a 9-year-old kid, that's a wonderful thing.
What struck me was, and you write about this, the consciousness of that 9-year-old not to tell everyone, because they'll think it's like, I want to be a cowboy or I want to be a movie star. You keep it to yourself, because it's so huge.
Sure, at 9-year-old, you're afraid of ridicule, of course, especially for something that's impossible. Canada didn't have an astronaut program. It wasn't a matter of unlikely, it was impossible. So it's not something you want to be declaring at the top of your lungs that's going to happen. But at the same time, I just resolved to myself that, boy, if this opportunity ever comes, I want to be Neil Armstrong. He's the coolest guy in the world. I want to be him. How do you become him? What do you do? He didn't start out walking on the moon. He got there. So how do I do that? And even though it does seem surreal and immensely improbable, that's how the effort began, was just with a resolution just before I turned 10 that somehow I'm going to try and turn myself into an astronaut and see what happens. There's
another problem that you write about, which is to this day, and as that 9-year-old, you're afraid of heights.
Yes, coming down the stairs there. I think being afraid of heights is a good thing. If you're not afraid of heights, you don't understand. You know, to be able to stand fearlessly on the edge of a cliff, it just makes my stomach feel terrible. But if there's a big railing, then I can convince myself that my fear should be kept at bay. Or if I'm bolted to the wall with a big stout cable, then I know I'm okay. And then I can stand fairly comfortably because I have figured a way to get around the fear by being ready, or knowing, because it's not really standing on the cliff I'm afraid of, it's hitting the ground, right? So if I know for sure there's no way I can hit the ground, then it's okay. Then the fear is controllable, and that lets me stand on the edge of a cliff, or fly an airplane, or do a spacewalk, because I know that I can't fall and hit the ground.
Your family is a farming background. You talk about jumping with your siblings to get over part of that fear as well. Your mum and dad ran the farm, but your father was also a commercial pilot.
Yes.
And you went an aviation route, albeit as a fighter pilot and as a test pilot as well. So I'm jumping forward a bit, but you and your young family are now living in the United States at a key moment in your life. So just tell us more about that.
It was a big decision. I'll just extrapolate it from 9 years old. What do you do at 9 years old to become an astronaut? I didn't really know, but I thought you fly in space. The verb is to fly. So I learned to fly as a teenager, and having a father who was a pilot helped. But there's an air cadet program in Canada. They would teach you to fly for free. So I'd done that. And then I took a year off and I hitchhiked around Europe, the continent, for a year, or for 6 months anyway, and finally decided yes. And so I joined the Air Force, as you say, went to university, military academy, and then did a tour as an F-18 pilot, and then went to test pilot school, which was a fascinating, complicated, hard year at Edwards in California. And then got to the stage you're at, which is being a test pilot on exchange as a Canadian with the United States Navy. And then Canada decided they were going to hire astronauts. The Canadian Space Agency had been formed, which for this little 9-year-old boy was like, yes, all right, there's a space agency now, maybe there's a chance. And then in 1992, when I was 32 or 33, they put a want ad in the papers that actually said, wanted astronauts. That's it.
And that process was grueling, and it's a great read about that process, but there's just a story. I mean, you emerged from it, and I love that you remember that it was a Saturday, it was May, it was between 1 and 3, you had to sit at the phone and you got the news that you're becoming an astronaut. But there's a great story, you have to keep it tight. So obviously you tell your wife, Helen, and you call your mother, right?
Yeah, it was so funny. I asked the people at the space agency, they called, don't tell anyone, you can't tell anyone because we want to make a big public splash announcement about it. Fine. So, okay, I said, can I tell my mom or my parents, my grandparents? So, yeah, just keep it within family, but tell them not to tell anyone. Fine. So I called my mom. She was all excited. I said, don't tell anyone, Mom. Fine. So then I said, oh, who will I call next? I'll call my grandpa. So I called my grandfather. I call him up. So, hey, guess what? I became an astronaut. Yeah, your mom just called me. Right. In the time it took me to dial. That's funny.
I want to get into space now. You have been.
So do I.
You've been 3 times.
Yes, three different flights. Twice on the space shuttle and once on the Russian Soyuz.
There's a nice poetry to the fact that you were kind of one of the builders of the International Space Station, and then you were the king of it. You were the commander of it for 6 months at the start of this year. But you've gone into space a couple of different ways because, of course, the shuttle program doesn't happen anymore. And so there is a big difference between, for example, how you just came home this year and how you've come home in the past.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit like the difference between landing here on Aer Lingus or being Felix Baumgartner jumping out of the thing and falling to Earth. But both of you get you back to the Earth, but they're quite a different experience. The space shuttle comes in so gracefully, it's not much different than an airliner. You only pull maybe twice the regular force of gravity. But on a Soyuz, which the Russian spaceship that I was the pilot of on this last flight, which we fly exclusively in Russian. So all of the training, all of the manuals, all of the flying, all the communications, everything's just purely in Russian. It comes into the atmosphere like a semi-steerable meteorite that you're riding on. You're basically in a meteorite. It's a little flat, sort of blunt object that comes in, and we just use friction from the air to slow us down. It's slightly steerable. You can steer it a little bit, but it's no airplane. And you pull about 4.5 times the force of gravity, which doesn't sound too bad. But if you're a 100-kilo person, suddenly you're a 450-kilo person. And after you've been a 0-kilo person for a while, when you've been weightless for half a year, to suddenly weigh, in my case, about whatever 350 kilos was pretty brutal. It just felt punishing. Just to be able to fill my lungs, I'm not used to having to lift my whole rib cage against 3 or 4 times their own weight. So it was quite a ride home. And then at the end of it, you get through the atmosphere, which is quite rigorous, very high vibration. As the parachute starts to open, it's like crack the whip. You're at the end of this tether, and the thing just shakes as violent can be. I mean, it was just ridiculously violent being in this thing. It was like dice in a cup. And we were laughing in the cockpit. It's like, couldn't be more violent than this. It's funny. And then the parachute opens, but you're coming down, you weigh 3 tons. And so it's one parachute with 3 tons underneath, so it's not an elegant landing. But you don't just thump into the earth vertically, but it's windy. We land in Kazakhstan on the steppes and plains and prairies of Kazakhstan. So you come in sideways. So you hit the ground really hard, and you hit the ground and tumble end over end. So you're basically hurled back to the earth, come crashing down. And the Russians, just before landing, they remind you, remember, Stop talking so you don't bite your tongue off. Which is a good thing to remind yourself just before next time you're on Aer Lingus, think about the fact, stop talking so I don't bite my tongue off. It might be a hard impact.
It would be a very different interview this morning. Let's talk about being up there, and I want to actually get out of the space station to the fact that you have performed spacewalks, which are just an amazing accomplishment from humanity that we can do that. Total of 15 hours out there?
Yes, which is 10 times around the world.
Yeah.
15 hours outside, split over 2 spacewalks. The first one was just a hair under 8 hours, and the second one just a little over 7 hours.
What is that like? Because you write great stories about shutting all the lights off in your spacesuit so you can just look at Earth and just the orientation of Earth and everything else.
Well, it's a wicked place to work in that you're in the vacuum of space. So your suit is not so much a suit as it is an inflated spaceship, a one-person inflated spaceship. And every time, because it's pressurized, every time you squeeze your hand, it's like squeezing a tennis ball. It's that level of effort to move anything. So it's pretty much being on an exercise machine for the whole 7 or 8 hours that you're outside. And it's not comfortable. Every move is resisted, so you chafe. You come in bleeding normally, just you've rubbed your skin through somewhere, your knuckles are rubbed raw, and you're peppered by micrometeorites the whole time, like being sandblasted the whole time out there. So there's a definite elevated risk. And we have had a couple astronauts have actually had a small puncture in their suit while outside, but you have a big enough oxygen tank that you can feed it for a while. And the temperature, if you look on the arm here, the temperature in the sun is plus 150 degrees C. And in the shade, it's minus 120 degrees C. So for the astronaut, it's the same thing. I mean, part of your suit is plus 150 and your left shoulder is minus 120. So it's just inherently, it's an amazing environment to be in. But all of that sort of falls away with the visuals. And you sort of get a feel for it looking at an image like this. And imagine if that was you, what you could see through your eyes from there. With the world, it's freeze frame here, but the world is going by at 8 kilometers a second underneath you. So you cross Africa in 5 minutes from side to side. So the speed of that and the ground rush going by, and if you just wait 45 minutes, you'll now be over Hawaii. And all of that is happening, and the colors of it, everything gets sort of faded in a photograph. The blue kind of dominates, but your eye takes out the blue and you see the colors and the textures of the world, and you are in the midst of it. And it's just phenomenal, because behind you, that black that's above the world, a projector just won't do justice to how. When we were designing our crew patch, this great artist we were working with, a guy named Paul Fjell, and we said, hey, we want space to be black. He said, do you want space to be blue or black? We're like, well, it's black. So we made it black, and he put it black, and we said, boy, can you make it blacker than that? He said, it's black, you know? He said, yeah, but it is so profound. It's 3-dimensionally black. There's an endlessness, maybe like looking down a well, but there's an endlessness where you don't have the filter of the atmosphere, and it's so dark where you can see the texture of the black and the depth of it. And you are in the middle of that, between this view of the world pouring underneath you and the blackness of the universe, and your entire link with everybody and everything. And all human history is you're holding on with one hand. And you are separate, you're going through space with the world. You're not on the planet looking up. The two of you are going through space together. And that, being in the universe with the world, you suddenly get a real sense of our delicate, unique level and the privilege of being able to see that through your own eyes.
Speaking of your eyes, you once went blind on a spacewalk.
On my very first spacewalk, you can see how I'm locked inside the suit, and you breathe. It's a big visor, of course, in front of your face. You sort of breathe onto it, and we have no food in there. We just have a water bag with a little, like a camelback valve. If you bite it, you can get water out of it, and it started leaking. Naturally, I couldn't get any water to drink out of it, but it started leaking. So I have water floating around in my suit, and one of these globs of water went into my eye. And you wouldn't think that'd be so bad water, but it had picked up some of the anti-fog on the visor itself, which was a mixture of oil and sort of an aggressive soap. So it's as if someone just took oil and soap and squirted it into my left eye. And of course, my left eye was not happy. It slammed shut. But I didn't know for sure what had caused the problem. But suddenly, I couldn't see out of my left eye. So your natural reaction is to rub your left eye. So up came my left hand, which went bounce off the visor. I was thinking, boy, I'm glad nobody was here to see me do that. But then I could only see out one eye. So if it were you, if you were out on your first spacewalk and we were building the big arm, and suddenly you were blind in one eye, what would you do? Well, I decided, well, maybe that's why we have two eyes. So I just kept working. But then, I learned afterwards, I looked into it, how tears work. Your tear duct is actually up here. It's a modified sweat gland. And it's up above your eye. And it secretes a thing that is not just salt water or even sweat, but it's a special mixture of chemicals that your eye secretes as tears. And it drains, pushes into your eye, and then it either drains down your cheek or it gets picked up by the little duct here and drains into your nose. It goes right through your eye, into your nose. That's why your nose runs when you cry. It's your tears draining. But all of that is gravity driven. And as in this photograph here, if you take away gravity, your tear, in fact, just gets bigger and bigger on your eye. You end up with this, tears don't fall in space. Now, unlike in gravity, where somehow they come squirting out of Sandra Bullock's eyes. She's got propulsive tears. I don't know how that happens. But
where did your tear go?
It just stays there on your one eye, and it gets on my left eye, and then, but your eye just keeps tearing away until trying to dilute the problem. But unfortunately, it got big enough that eventually just crossed. I don't have a nice big proud Roman nose. I just got this humble little nose, and it crossed the bridge of my nose and went into my right eye. Great. So now both eyes were contaminated. My right eye slammed shut, and I was blind.
What did you say on the radio?
Well, what would you say? So, you're up there on your first spacewalk. You're holding onto the ship, and none of your other four senses really do you any good. And sight is everything there, and I couldn't see. So I had to fess up, and so I called down to Houston. Houston, I have a problem. I'm blind, which of course caused an enormous reaction on the ground, and they thought maybe it was due to the lithium hydroxide, which is how we remove carbon dioxide, how we clear the air from your breath. And if lithium hydroxide starts leaking into the suit, it's like a powder, then one of the first symptoms is eye irritation, and then the second symptom is lung damage. So they didn't want to get to the lung damage stage, so they had me open up the purge valve here, where you push a button, pop it out, turn it 90 degrees, and actually allow your air to squirt out into space. They asked me to do that. I'm thinking, okay. So I did that. I'd practiced it a million times. But there, I opened it, turned this thing 90 degrees, and it goes. So now I'm blind in space, listening to my oxygen hissing, thinking, this isn't how I planned this to go. But it was strangely peaceful, actually. Well, because it's like, well, I'm still alive, and I've got quite a bit of oxygen, and if I truly stayed blind out here, the fellow that I was out with, named Scott Parazinski, we had practiced rescuing each other for all sorts of incapacitation. In fact, it's called Incapacitated Crew Rescue. We'd practiced it many times, and he could come and grab me like a balloon and take me over and stuff me back into the airlock. And I wasn't dead, I was just blind. And so we practiced it, and we talked about it, and then we just waited to see whether my eyes would clear or not.
And the book, there are people here who say that their children or they want to be astronauts, and the book talks about all that constant training. The quote of training to time and space is absolutely huge, or the proportion. I want to ask you about the other stuff, and I was reading your book and I was wondering, so you're looking at our blue planet, but then you're looking at the rest of the stuff. What do you think? Are we alone, or does there have to be other life out there?
In the last, I was talking with Brian Cox a couple days ago, and he did the math, because the Hubble telescope has shown us how many galaxies there are. And each galaxy from our own, we know, is millions and millions and millions of stars. And the Kepler telescope, which is up there recently, has shown us that pretty much every single star has planets. Every star has planets. And we've seen directly thousands of planets around the nearest stars to us. and the numbers are so huge. I think he said there were at least 80 billion Earth-like planets that we know of. So 80 billion is a really big number. So to think that this is the only one where life could have developed, to me, is just sort of the height of self-importance and arrogance. You know, like, oh yeah, 80 billion to 1, but I'm going to keep buying lottery tickets. And no, I mean, so I think there's has to be life in the universe. And in fact, on Mars this last week, they just discovered that there was a huge freshwater lake there for millions of years, and they could see in the sediment, it's just the sort of sediment that we would find microbes or bacteria in on Earth. So we haven't found life anywhere else yet, but we have a real good shot at least finding fossilized life on Mars. And that'll answer the question, because if there's fossilized or extant life on Mars, then there's life everywhere. But I don't think the natural extrapolation is that if you see something that you don't understand, the only solution could be that it's intelligent life from Beta Centauri. I'm not sure that's the first thing that, you know, that's a UFO. Everyone forgets the first word in UFO is unidentified. To immediately identify it as intelligent life from another source is a bit of arrogance as well, that we think we're so interesting and important that that's what would happen. I think there's got to be life other places in the universe, but I don't think that they're sneaking around abducting farmers and putting circles in the ground.
When you're looking at Earth, you're looking at Earth from either out in space or from, as you did for 6 months, actually almost this time last year, you were about 5 days away from liftoff this time last year. And all the family, though, your daughter told me, is on Earth this Christmas, so you're all going to be in Canada. But
we're all on Earth this Christmas.
When you look at Earth from up there, what are you a religious person? Do you believe in a creator, or do you believe we're just here?
Every religion is within the astronaut office. Every religion, and there are atheists in the astronaut office and agnostics. And I flew in space with Russians and people from other countries, so all different faiths. And looking at the world, it is such a unique jewel of a thing to see. It's so hard to think that it's random. But I mean, you're no closer to God 400 kilometers up. You know, it's not a distance thing. So it's mostly just a matter of faith. And I think if anybody in the room here flew in space, it would reinforce your faith, whatever faith.
So you're a man of faith. You don't need to say any more, but you do have a faith.
Yeah, you don't become an astronaut by being undecided about things. You have to have some sort of strength that gives you. I mean, the average age to be hired as an astronaut is 36. You need to have worked almost half a career just to become a rookie astronaut, and it takes a great amount of strength and resolve, and that doesn't just come from nowhere.
I checked as of the start of December, 536 people from 38 countries have left the Earth and gone into space, and you're one of them. But there perhaps could be more people with the dawn of space tourism, and Branson wants to do it. What do you think of that? Do you think they're pretenders, or do you want to?
No, I think they're quite credible. In fact, a couple of the former astronauts work for Richard Branson now to be the pilots of that thing. And it's far harder than even Richard Branson thought it would be or would like it to be. Their first flight was in 2004, on their first test flight, and they still haven't taken one paying customer almost a decade later. So it's hard. It's cost him a lot of money to build that capability. But I think they're talking September for their first flight, or at least hopefully within a year, which is great. And I'm all for it. Spaceflight has always been commercial. I mean, the lunar lander was built by Grumman for profit. The space shuttle was built by Rockwell for profit. Even the space station is maintained by Boeing for profit. So it's always been commercial. The big difference is the customer has always been the government. And what Richard Branson is trying to do is make the customer a private citizen. It's still very expensive, but it's the cost of an expensive car to go to space. The cost of a Bentley, basically, and you could fly in space. And lots of people can afford a Bentley. I can't, but lots of people can afford a Bentley. So maybe he has a good business model, and I think he is being the brave renegade who is finding a way to get private citizens for the first time to be able to fly in space for something that isn't a ridiculous amount of money. You know, it's not many millions. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Very expensive, but someone has to make that first bridge. And I commend them for it. Well, hopefully they have great success, because it's a really hard thing to do. But it should open the door And he may not have the best final solution how to do this, how to take private citizens into space, but someone had to start somewhere, and he's doing it really well.
Of those 38 countries, Ireland isn't one yet. We haven't had an Irish person in space yet, but probably most people here, just before going to bed at the start of this year, were checking your tweets, and then while getting up, checking them again, because you tweet lots of pictures of everywhere, but we felt extra special when there'd be an Irish one there. And a lot of buzz, a lot of excitement. I know you know about this. I know obviously your daughter lives here, she's studying here, so she knows about this. We spoke to your son, Evan, on the program a couple of times. Yes. He was integral in you communicating with people. But was that stumbled upon, or, because you're a clever guy, and you are right, what you said earlier is very evident in the book. That 9-year-old planned everything, and also planned 3 variations at each junction of what could happen. So was that a little eureka moment that YouTube's now there, Twitter's now there? The astronauts a decade ago didn't have that capability. I do. Let's pounce on it.
Well, I was an astronaut a decade ago, and 2 decades ago. My first flight, the only way I wanted to share the experience to the best of my ability, and what I had was a film camera and a ham radio. And if you're trying to mass communicate, that's a really poor combination. You talk to one guy in a hut somewhere on ham radio, and I would take a beautiful picture of Ireland, and I go, all right, I think it turned out, because it was a film camera. Hope it turned out. And then you had to wait till you landed, and then you would send the film off to the lab, and 2 weeks later you get this roll of negatives back, and I'm scrolling through them. Where's that picture of Dublin? Oh, I think that's it. Hard to tell on a negative. And they say, okay, make a print of this one. 2 weeks later you get the prints back, and going, oh yeah, that's a nice picture of Dublin. Okay, make me a slide of that. 2 weeks later you have a 35mm slide of Dublin, and you're in Houston. It's like, what do I do now? I have to wait. Yeah, so wait 2 years till I travel, and then when I get to Ireland, what do I do with my 35mm slide? Maybe I can gather some people in a room and put it in a projector and put it up here. And it's been 2 years since I took the picture, and that's the best we could do. And I did it a lot. I did that for years. But now, with the technology that we have, social media is so social. It's so inclusionary and invitational. And I could take a picture of Ireland and within an hour send it to millions of people in the world, including people across the country here. And the beauty of it is, it wasn't just yelling at people to, hey, look. It was more like, if you want to come on board and see what we're seeing, you're welcome to. And that's the beauty of social media. It's social, it's not just media. And so I could take the time to take a picture and look at why I thought it was funny or special or goofy or whatever, and include people in the conversation and read all the feedback and look at the wave of fun that people were having and feeling that everyone was part of it. And it was just delightful.
And look, everyone here knows, and millions of people have watched your Bowie video. You also performed in space live, back down to Earth, with the Symphony in Canada, with some fellow astronauts, and with the Irish group, the Chieftains.
I did.
And that was great, and you performed great. You guys haven't seen each other, but if there was another studio here today and the Chieftains were in that studio this morning, would you be willing?
Are you speaking hypothetically?
For the next 30 seconds or so. Would you be willing to perform with them this morning?
I would be, anytime, anywhere, on Earth or not. I'd be delighted to play with the Chieftains, sure.
Okay, well, after the break, Chris Hadfield and the Chieftains will be performing together. Sean Keane and Kevin Kniff in another room. The studio is too small for all of you, but we can project it on the screen for you. So they're going to do a rehearsal. Chris didn't know about this, so he's going to just get over the guitar we have for him and stuff like that. They're going to do a rehearsal, and we will be beaming them performing Moondance into this room in probably about 10 minutes time. So please stay here. Also, I know lots of you have books and photographs. Chris is very, very kind with his time, so he's going to be coming back downstairs after that. So in the meantime, let's look at some of his other musical repertoire, and in a minute you'll see Chris Hadfield and the Chieftains. So thank you very much, okay?